Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So welcome to APSA Field Crops webinar series. We are on session 2, now on the carbon credit management and climate change. My name is Kuna. I'm the Knowledge and Research Programs Manager, and I will be with you today to explain you a bit about the housekeeping rules for APSA webinars. As you know, if you have any technical problems, like you cannot hear the sound, you have problems with the audio, please put it in the chat box. Please note that participants, you are not allowed to open microphone and camera. So if you have any questions to speakers, please put it in the Q&A box. So remember, question to speakers, Q&A box. Any problem, put it in the chat box and we'll take it and help you. Participants can also click like in the Q&A box, and questions that got most like will get priority to be answered by the speaker. So with that, let me stop sharing the screen, and I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Venkatram Vasantawada. He is our member of APSA Special Interest Group for Field Crops, and he is also the Managing Director and CEO of Seedworks International, where he leads innovations in hybrid seeds for rice, cotton, millet, and mustard. With over 3 decades of experience in agribusiness, he has played a vital role in advancing field crop productivity across India. And his leadership has earned him multiple honors, including the Most Influential Agriculture Industry Professional Award in 2020, Leader with Strategic Vision in 2022, and Entrepreneur of the Year by Hyderabad Management Association in 2019. With that, may I invite Dr. Venkatram. The floor is yours, sir. Please open your microphone, sir.
Good day, everyone, and thank you so much, Kuna, for the opportunity. I have a pleasure in participating in this webinar as a moderator. So without much ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker. I think today in this APSA webinar, we are covering a very, very important topic of carbon credit management in field crops. We all have known that sustainability is one of the most critical aspects in agriculture. We impact climate and climate also impacts us. And to that extent, how do we make our agriculture more sustainable? And in the process of making it sustainable, what is the incentive to the small and the marginal farmers, and how do we take advantage of it is what will be discussed in this webinar. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Katherine Nelson. Dr. Katherine Nelson is a climate change scientist in the International Rice Research Institute, Hanoi at Vietnam. She will talk about inclusive digital tools to enable climate-informed agroecological transitions. So a brief introduction about Dr. Katherine. Dr. Katherine is a climate change scientist at the International Rice Research Institute in Hanoi. With a PhD in behavioral environmental economics, she specializes in low-emission rice production, climate-smart agri-food systems, and MRV technologies. Her work supports Southeast Asian farmers in accessing climate finance through integrated carbon frameworks. The topic what she is going to dwell on today is inclusive digital tools to enable climate-informed agroecological transitions. She will outline the key requirements for rice carbon credit projects, including planning, implementation, and verification phases. She will also highlight methane reducing practices like alternate wetting and drying AWD, and the importance of robust monitoring, reporting, and verification systems using digital tools. The session will emphasize inclusive, well-documented approaches to ensure fair and effective climate mitigation. I think this session has come at a very, very appropriate time where all of us are kind of now navigating this climate change and also looking at what kind of solutions are there for it. So I would welcome Dr. Katherine. The floor is open for you. Please educate us on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Venkatram, and everyone for joining today. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the introduction. Let me share my slides here. And if you can give me a thumbs up or something to show me that you are seeing the slides in slideshow. Yeah, okay, great, thanks. So thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. As mentioned, I'm going to go through what some of the requirements for a rice carbon credit project would be. And please feel free as I go through the presentation to add your questions to the Q&A function, as we'll have plenty of time afterwards for question and answers. So just to start, rice does produce, quite a lot of emissions. So what we have here on the screen is you can see that within the agricultural sector, livestock does have the most, and these are focusing on non-CO2 emissions. So this would be methane. So livestock contributes significantly to methane alongside croplands. And then croplands is all crops together. And you see that rice just alone as a single crop also contribute, relatively significantly for a single crop. So when we look at the numbers and the percentages of that, rice contributes about 6 to 8% of total food system emissions, while livestock is more close to around 40 to 50%. This is why we hear much more, or we have in the past heard much more about livestock in terms of methane emissions, and there has been a strong focus on reducing emissions from livestock. But what I think is important to note here, particularly as we look at some of the countries in Southeast Asia, is that the emissions from rice in these countries, because this is where rice is primarily grown, the profile is that rice is much higher in many cases than livestock and other crops. So this presents some overlooked opportunities, mainly because also when we shift focus to look at the mitigation potential from these sectors, we see a big difference that rice now takes croplands and is quite comparable actually to livestock in compared to the mitigation potential of livestock. So on average, the mitigation potential for rice is around 36% versus around 9% for livestock and 3% for croplands. And when you take that picture and isolate it to the ASEAN countries, then we see a much bigger focus on mitigation potential from rice than the other sectors. It's important, though, when we look at the flow of global finance to abate methane, that when you look at where the money is going, it's primarily going towards waste management, livestock, and then some also to the AFOLU sector, but this is not including rice. So if you look at this picture, the Sankey diagram here, at the very bottom are the rice paddies, and that you can see is primarily being funded by public sources, and it's going primarily here to what looks like sub-Saharan Africa, but also South Asia and Southeast Asia do receive a portion of that. However, the picture here is telling us that there is potential for greater investment in order to have greater impact, particularly in the rice sector. So when we're talking about mitigation potential from rice, we're generally speaking about alternate wetting and drying. Alternate wetting and drying is a practice that it would be a behavior change practice from many farmers, but not for all. So continuously flooding the field, which means keeping the rice paddy field at around 5 centimeters or so flooded throughout the growing period of the season until just before harvest, when it's drained out about 2 weeks before harvest. That's what we would consider a continuously flooded condition. And when you break this cycle of flooding, so you have periods where you drain the field and let the water run out of the field or percolate down for a few days, that would be considered a drainage period. And if you have 2 drainage periods that last at least 3 days before it's irrigated again, then it is considered as intermittent drainage, or also referred to as alternate wetting and drying. When we look at the bigger picture of how much total emissions can be reduced from rice, there are several practices that can be done. So some of these include the timing and amount of residue incorporation and pre-season flooding. And if there's changes to this, you can generally have around 10% of mitigation potential from that. If you switch from long duration varieties to short duration varieties, that also is a direct impact on the emissions. The practices during the season, such as alternate wetting and drying and fertilizer use, are where the majority of the mitigation comes from. The averages here are also, when everything is combined, they're not necessarily cumulative. And so this is why we've put the water management at 33%, although there's lots of studies and evidence and also standards showing that when practiced on its own, it reduces emissions on average by 45%. And then finally, the amount of residue that would get burned. So if it's not burned or if it's removed, then you have additional farm level mitigation. So if it's a package, you can reduce more than the 45% with alternate wetting and drying on its own. But as I mentioned before, if you mix these, they're not necessarily cumulative. So you would need to calculate based on the individual practices that you wanted to apply. The reason why alternate wetting and drying here is marked in red is because from a carbon credit standpoint, until very recently, the only practice that you could generate credits on was alternate wetting and drying. Recently, VERA, the Voluntary Carbon Market Registry, has released a new methodology specific to rice, in which you can incorporate additional actions, such as reducing fertilizer use in order to reduce emissions. I'll talk a little bit about the VERA methodology later, but the most important thing to note there is that there is a methodology available for multiple actions for mitigation. So for the initial steps in setting up a carbon credit project, I've listed about 9 steps here that are what's needed to do just to get, let's say, the project off the ground. So it doesn't include everything for like the entire life cycle of the project, but it's for setting up or getting started. And it's important to note these because there's quite high investments and time and effort that need to be put into before the project even starts. So the first step would be to define the purpose of your project. So is the idea that you want to generate credits so that you can sell them back to the country domestically or to another sector, let's say industry sector, who may have a cap and has exceeded that, and then they want to purchase emissions to offset their cap? Or is it to sell credits internationally? So you may have somebody who wants to use these credits to offset their company emissions in another country. And if those are also subjected to caps in their country, then they will need to be able to submit that emission reduction to the government towards the NDCs. So that is going to require a special corresponding adjustment and other kinds of agreements. Or is it just to provide evidence to contribute towards your country's NDC? All of these choices do affect the value of the credit. Next, you would need to determine the methodology your project will follow, and this is where you have to choose between the existing methodologies, such as VERA's VM0051. Gold Standard has a methodology specific to rice. Article 6 is the international trade agreement between countries to trade carbon mitigation outcomes from one country to another. And then you also have domestic trading schemes. And that would be, as I mentioned before, like there might be a cap on particular industry and they can purchase credits to offset how much they've gone over those caps. Following that, you would need to choose the location of the project, and that needs to be done following the methodological guidelines from the standard that you're expecting to register and verify your credits. This is important because there's different requirements for establishing eligibility, additionality, and baselines. But what's most important is that the area needs to be irrigated. So all of the methodologies only consider irrigated area. And the starting point generally should be that the baseline is the farmers are doing continuously flooded practices. The reason being because if you start with a project where people are already doing, let's say, 1 drainage, then the amount of mitigation potential from 1 to 2 drainages is quite small, and probably you're not going to get a return on your investment. I will go into a little more detail in each of in the first 5 of these in the next slides. Following that, you'll need to ensure that you have the required permission from government bodies to develop a carbon credit project, and that the farmers that you will work with have the rights to own and use the credits. Generally, this means they need to have land tenure rights, but not in all cases. So you'll have to look into that based on the specifications of the methodology. Further, you'll need to determine the tier that you plan to use. So tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 greenhouse gas calculations. And I'll go into more detail in another slide on this. And then the baseline characteristics and stratification that are required to assess the mitigation potential. And then through this, you'll also understand what the return on investment may be. This is done through farmer surveys, greenhouse gas chamber measurements, and other kinds of studies. And this does also affect the value of the credits, then based on which tier you go with, as well as the baseline requirement or baseline characteristics. Following this, then you would need to hold stakeholder consultations with farmers and officials in the area, and there are guides on what kinds of consultations, questions that need to be asked, and approvals that need to be provided by those that would participate in the project, depending on the methodology that you go with. Then you need to train farmers on the practices, as well as how they would need to record the practices in logbooks or apps. Sometimes the project owner may require them to record things like water depth during the drainage periods, timing. All of the methodologies, I believe, require the times and the dates of irrigation, and some other requirements. So this is an important aspect of setting up a carbon credit project. Following that, then you'd need to develop, and this can also be done in parallel with these previous items, but develop a project design document and register that project with the chosen carbon market body, which would be Verra Gold Standard or UNFCCC, for example. And then lastly, you need to find a validation and verification body that is already registered with your chosen carbon market body, and contact them to then validate the project and verify emission reduction. This can often be done together the first time, so you can validate the project and already verify emission reductions retroactively for up to a certain number of years. The number of years that you can do that for is different based on which methodology has been chosen. So I'll go into a little more detail on the first 5. But the last 4 are generally straightforward, and I can also give you some resources for information on those. So first, when it comes to defining the purpose of the project, this is very important because there are different types of carbon markets and emission reduction mechanisms, and those will affect how you choose to design your project. So on one side, we have compliance markets like CORSIA, voluntary carbon markets like Verra and Gold Standard that can also go towards compliance markets. Carbon taxes and cap and trade is often an area of how they define these compliance markets. Then you have the Clean Development Mechanism, which is the older version of Article 6 and is inactive. And Japan has their own Joint Crediting Mechanism, or JCM. You have also other approaches, such as jurisdictional approaches, where you could theoretically look at combining many smallholder farmers together that have the same practices into a single farm. So you have like small fields, but a large farm that is homogeneous in how the practices are done and how the biophysical characteristics of the land are. And that can reduce some of the costs for monitoring and reporting. And then finally, there are approaches such as mass balance approaches or book and claim approaches. This has not been used for rice, but there are some examples for other types of crops like soy. And this is where you do not need to necessarily track the chain of custody to the consumer or to the retail trade. So it just means that you're saying like a certain percentage of our pipeline, we will reduce emissions by 30% in 10% of our pipeline, something like that. Depending on how you do this, it will require different types of monitoring, reporting, and verification. And it will also affect who buys the credits and how much the credits are worth. Finally, or next, you'll need to define the methodology. So this, as I mentioned before, there are multiple methodologies available. The CDM methodology is inactive now, but Gold Standard, Social Carbon, and Verra's Tier 1 and Tier 2 methodologies all build on the CDM methodology, which is why I still mention it. American Carbon Registry also had a rice methodology, but it is currently inactivated and is only applicable in California. And then there are different types of frameworks for MRV, depending on whether the country is claiming these for their own NDC emissions, in which case you need to follow the framework for the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. In terms of using these for different protocols, so as I mentioned before, you have to determine if the emission reduction credit will stay in the country going towards the country's NDCs where the credits were generated, or if they will be traded outside of the country and ultimately go towards meeting the NDCs of another country. This can get a little bit tricky, and I won't go into full detail, but there may be some questions around this later. Specifically, that if it's just to meet your own domestic NDCs, there are typically less strict guidelines in terms of how this is monitored, reported, and verified that are set by the country themselves. And then there's typically some type of statistical analysis or quality control at the national level, and then that information goes into the national inventory. If it's a private sector that is setting up and wants to keep the credits to offset their own emissions, then it's really dependent on whether that's a compliance market for the country where that private company exists, meaning that they would need to have a corresponding adjustment, meaning it has to be taken out of the inventory of the country where the credits were generated and transferred through a corresponding adjustment to the country of purchasing the carbon credits. If no corresponding adjustment is necessary, meaning it's just going towards, let's say, a company's sustainability goals or company's net zero commitment, sometimes there's no need for a corresponding adjustment, in which case then the credit for the emission reduction can still stay in country. Now, when we get to choosing a location, this is one of the most complicated parts of organizing a carbon credit project for rice, because the location of where farmers are currently practicing continuous flooding is not known. So currently all greenhouse gas inventories from pretty much all countries in the world, except for maybe one or two, are based entirely on assumptions. And the baselines were essentially set using an assumption that everyone is practicing continuous flooding, but we know that that's actually not true. And that can be due to weather, inclement weather. So they may have drought periods where there's involuntary drainage periods, but that still counts towards the mitigation reduction that happens during a drainage event. And so therefore, those farmers their fields are drained whether they're actively doing that or not, meaning they still would not have eligibility in a carbon credit program. So what you're seeing here is a map of the Mekong Delta in the 3 seasons. So there's 3 different seasons in Vietnam for growing rice. On the left is the dry season, basically, and there you can see that pretty much most of the areas where rice is grown, it is suitable to practice AWD. In the 2nd and 3rd seasons, you see that suitability going down significantly, and that's mainly driven by things like weather. So the third season here all the way on the far right is the monsoon season. And when you have as much rain as the Mekong Delta gets during the monsoon season, it is nearly infeasible to actually drain the fields. And that's also just because the water table is so high during that time period. One thing about additionality that's really important to focus on is that to apply for a carbon credit project, you need to show that no more than 20% of the farmers in the area where your carbon credit project is going to be are already practicing AWD. And you also have to show that the area where your project is not under a current project, such as a government program, for example. And this has also led to some complications where we see, big national programs signaling that they're ready to interact bilaterally and discuss having a Article 6 type of project with another country. And if they've already mapped out the boundaries of where, the area that people could work in, then that may be considered a current project, even if there isn't finance to actually transition that area. And the program is set up specifically to attract international finance. So that's something we have seen a little bit of in Vietnam, that there's quite a lot of confusion around where someone could actually, a private sector company, for example, could start a carbon credit project, because there is a very large 1 million hectare government program on low emission rice. And so there's quite a bit of confusion. Some people say it's meant for carbon project developers to work within the 1 million hectare area, and others say no, they have to work outside of it. So this is something that you should get clarity on, both from the government side as well as from the carbon market side, from the carbon registry, before investing in the project. Another requirement is to know that you have permission from the government to actually develop a carbon credit project, and that the farmers have the rights to own and use the credits. Now here's just a list of around 9 items in Vietnam's current legal framework, and this has changed a little bit since recently. They have upgraded their Decree 06 to Decree 119, which has more specific information about carbon markets, but it still gives you an example based on what country you're from or that you operate in. These might be different. But there are many government agencies with overlapping responsibilities, which creates confusion and inefficiency between who can provide approval. Is it the Ministry of Environment or is it the Ministry of Agriculture? Then you also have things like MRV requirements. So there might be multiple different agencies that are responsible for different parts of reporting, and who then collates that information, puts it together into the inventory to ensure that they have all the information together. There should be a domestic registry where you can register a carbon credit project so that they can keep track, and also, make sure that those are taken out of the inventory when they're updating the NDCs and the inventories. I won't go through all 9 of these as you can see them here, but some of the other important ones are alignment with Paris Agreement and, clear responsibilities for how do you enforce, no double counting, and other types of regulations, and corresponding, the designated department that can do corresponding adjustments is also crucial for working in this space. And many governments within Southeast Asia and the Pacific lack the current legal framework for private sector to operate within the country on a carbon credit project, and so might need to, do a lot of legwork in advance to ensure that they have all the necessary approvals, because these projects last, quite long, up 15 years or so. And so if the next administration comes in and says you did not have the legal approval, they could cut a project short potentially. So another requirement is that you need to determine the tier of how you will quantify the greenhouse gas emissions and the baseline characteristics and stratification. So this will require large-scale surveys of farmers to determine their eligibility for the project. So what is their baseline, who's doing continuously flooding, and register, them sign them up for the project if they're interested. This would mean, let's say, if you're aiming for 20,000 farmers to join your project, you may need to actually survey something like 100 to 200,000 farmers to find 20,000 farmers that are eligible. Through this data, you may also need to show the additionality claim that less than 20% of farmers in the area currently practice the alternate wetting and drying. Tier 1 uses IPCC sub-regional default factors or global default factors for the emissions. Tier 2 uses more localized regional emission factors if those exist from a country, and those can come from direct measurements from the country's inventory that may be publicly available or published, or it can also come from scientific literature and research. Tier 3, which Vera, under their VM0051, is the only methodology that allows, or that has a method for using Tier 3. Tier 3 is biogeochemical modeling, such as the DNDC model, and also the ARRI Plus model now has greenhouse gas calculation functions. DNDC is commercialized through Regrow, and ARRI is a free product. But on one side, the free product is the skeleton, the structure, the actual modeling aspects, whereas the data that needs to go into the model in order for it to give you an output still requires very high quality and lots of data in order to calibrate and validate the model. And that needs to be done according to another methodology called Vera VMD0053. That process of calibrating and collecting high quality data, calibrating and validating a model, is incredibly expensive and time consuming because it requires very, very rigorous data quality and quantity. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of people jump straight to thinking Tier 3 is the best without really understanding what it takes to be able to have a calibrated and validated model for the particular area where you're working. Now, some methodologies will require a look-back period of 3 years, meaning when you go to collect the baseline data from farmers, you need to ask them to recall every season over the last 3 years and their practices that they did during that time. If one of those years, let's say there was a drought, for example, which lasted for 3, 4, 5 days, and they couldn't irrigate or there just wasn't enough water at that time, that is a drainage event. And because of that, you would need to consider that farmer as being already doing a single drainage, which would mean that their mitigation potential from one drainage to multiple drainages is reduced significantly. So the Vera methodology is the one that uses the look-back period of 3 years, and they would require you to use the most conservative baseline from the last 3 years as that farmer's baseline. So even if for 2 years they did continuously flooding, and then 1 year there was a drought event where, for whatever reason, their field was drained, even if it wasn't from their choice, they would still go into a baseline category of mid-season or single drainage. Then you need to determine if the farmers are currently practicing AWD, as I mentioned already, and if they are, then they are ineligible to participate in the project. And that's unfortunate because it means that a lot of the first movers are not going to benefit from any incentivization, but the idea is that this will hopefully transform the slower adopters. There are some strategies to benefit sharing where you could still benefit share with those farmers that were first adopters by doing like a community benefit sharing, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A if you like. Then there's also a stratification process that needs to happen where the project developer stratifies the project area based on criteria indicated within the methodology. And this is generally soil properties, weather during the season, and the farm management practices. And these are listed within the methodology. I can also go into more detail in Q&A if there's interest there. And then finally, you may also need to physically collect greenhouse gas measurements using closed chambers from at least 3 reference fields, which each field needs to have 3 chambers in every field. So that would be a total of 9 greenhouse gas chambers that are collecting data for each strata, and that determines the emission factor for your project. This is required for Japan's JCM and for medium to large scale projects under gold standard and Verra that are expected to generate over 60,000 tons of CO2 per year. I just have about 5 minutes left, so I think that'll be on time. So some of the supporting tools that we offer from IRRI is that we have a tool that's called Map AWD, and this can be used to determine the suitable area for where you can practice AWD, and also for estimating the mitigation potential in that area. However, this is based on the biophysical characteristics, the tool, and not necessarily farmer practices. So if you wanted to also ensure that you were capturing the actual farmer practices and not just whether it would be suitable based on weather and soil characteristics, you would also need to combine surveys with that, which leads me to the next point, that we also offer multiple published, publicly available MRV guides and survey templates for the questions that need to be asked for farmers in order to calculate emissions according to Tier 1 and Tier 2. And this can be used for baseline setting, estimating mitigation potential of the project, and then it's also what's used at the end of the season to show that how much they have reduced emissions in the end. We also have a platform which is called RICEmore, and that is a rice monitoring and a reporting platform. This is a platform that is scaled out at the national level for their national reporting and greenhouse gas inventories, but it also has an app component of it, which we call FarmMore. So that's farm monitoring and reporting. And that's a survey app that is open survey, anyone can use it to collect the farmer data at the field level. And it is connected to a greenhouse gas calculator via an API. So it also will respond immediately with the greenhouse gas emissions based on the input data. So what you can see on the right side here, this colorful phone, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th bar down is greenhouse gas emissions, and the bar there shows like from 0 to 30, and then the small arrows. One shows the results of the farmer who input data, and the other arrow, so the red arrow, shows the average of farmers in their area. So this also helps farmers to understand whether they're, well above their peers or within a general average, as well as to give them some idea from a scientific standpoint of whether they're on the low emission side or the high emission side using that benchmark from the traffic light symbol. The questions and calculation process that are integrated into this app are using the IPCC equations for Tier 1 and Tier 2, which are accepted both by Gold Standard and Verra's VM0051 for the Tier 1 and Tier 2 options. And then finally, we also have a tool that is called Compare, which is a cost benefit assessment tool that is used for planning carbon credit projects at scale. And so this has a timeline of up to 30 years, because it's rare that if you have a project, let's say it's 200,000 hectares, that you could convert from 0 to 200,000 hectares in one, immediately. So you may have to do this year by year, where you convert, let's say 10,000 in the first year, then 50,000, then the next year 50,000 over a certain number of years until you reach 200,000. And then for the next 7, 8, 10 years, you have 200,000 farmers. This also allows you to put in costs for investment. So, how much does it cost for training? How much does it cost for infrastructure? And you can also put in a carbon price, which allows you to then calculate the net present value and the return on investment with the offset of the carbon credit price. Just a little bit more detail on the Farm More app, because I think that's probably what would be used most by the people in the group, is that it is a performance assessment app. And it's currently designed to meet a set of 5 criteria, which are the sustainability criteria defined most important and prioritized for Vietnam, because that's where this was originally designed. And that's for them to reduce the seed rate, practice alternate wetting and drying, reduce the nitrogen fertilizer rate, the number of pesticide applications, and by default, also then reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So the benchmarks that you see here reflect those 5 practices that are part of the sustainability package that is promoted by the Vietnam government. So a few recommendations for private sector is that you must seek approval for carbon projects with appropriate government agents. For projects that are going to be registered with the voluntary carbon market, you should likely prepare to work outside of government established low emission program areas until receiving specific authorization to work within those areas. In the absence of a legal and regulatory framework for carbon markets at the national level, then you can follow the voluntary carbon market requirements for a project in terms of design, registration, MRV, the validation and verification process, and the issuance of credits, though that will be recognized internationally. So even if the country themselves just wants to absorb those in order to count towards the NDCs, they will count towards that. They will count towards trade, etc. And then you should also explore, prior to setting up the project, the potential buyer willingness and their price points to offtake the credits. That's important because otherwise you won't know what the return on your investment might be. And you may need to get guarantees that they will purchase those credits at that rate over a 10-year period, or you might have a scale, an ascending scale, assuming that the value of credit may go up over time. So there might be different ways to do that. Further, for international private companies, it's important to explore the willingness to and price points to purchase credits that are used towards another country's NDCs. This would be a credit that has a corresponding adjustment with it, and the value of the credit will be higher if it has a corresponding adjustment. You may also do market studies to evaluate your customers' willingness to pay premiums for low emission rice that can also help offset the costs for the project, or be able to provide monetary incentives and benefits to the farmers themselves through paying higher price for the rice that is produced in low emission conditions. Also need to engage with government and other actors through policy dialogue forums and other kinds of workshops to address challenges, concerns, and risks. And then clarify the needs of the issues of the carbon credits that are issued by voluntary carbon market with corresponding adjustments and without. So again, depending on what you want to use with it, you need to know, do you need that corresponding adjustment or not? And if you do, then you definitely need to get ensure that locally within the country there is an assigned body to do that adjustment. From a government perspective, and I don't know how many people in the group are from government, so I will just briefly go through these. There should be a very clearly defined project authorization process and percentage of area or emissions that are available for private sector investment with and without corresponding adjustments. They should issue specific regulations and instructions on how to implement activities that would influence the greenhouse gas inventory. Create opportunities for private sector to access and participate in markets, and complete the system of mechanisms, policies, and guidelines for implementing emission reduction measures. I believe this is my last slide. So one more on recommendations for government: organize policy dialogues and forums for private sector and other public sector cooperation, coordinate across agencies and sectors to review legal regulations for MRV, strengthen coordination, information sharing, and interregional intersectoral dialogue and issues. And then finally, research the application of new technology and tools that can be used to bring down the costs for monitoring and reporting and verification, and for project design as well, that can be used to calculate and update, store data on inventories and facilities globally. I will stop there. That is my time. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this was helpful, and I would like to open it up to questions. My contact information is here, as well as a reference website, ghgmitigation.irri.org, has a lot of publications, tools, resources that are helpful. Sector.irri.org is the web calculator for the greenhouse gas calculator. And then the QR codes over here are for the Rice More app that I was telling you, and the Farm More survey function is within that app. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Katherine, for a very informed session. There are two questions which I can see in the box. The first one are, how many seed companies are currently engaged in Vietnam in the carbon credit projects? Any numbers or any idea you want to give?
There are several companies. Whether they're seed companies, I'm not 100% sure. So some of them are private sector rice traders, and I know there are. I would not be able to give you a number, but my guess is that it would cover around 200 to 210,000 hectares. So I don't know how many individual companies are involved in that, but there are around that many hectares that are currently in these kind of projects that are really focused on generating credits.
Okay, great. The other question is, before I move on to Dr. Frisco Malabnan, can we change the methodology after implementing the project for some time, is a question which one of the participants is asking.
I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure. So under some methodologies, so generally speaking, the project may be like a 5 or a 7 year project that then says it's quote unquote twice renewable. And oftentimes in that process of renewing it, you also need to reset baselines, which is not 100% clear to me, because if everyone that's participating in the project is actually doing the practices, then resetting the baseline wouldn't be possible, because you know they couldn't participate in the project for the next 2 phases because their baseline would now show that they're ineligible. So it may be possible in that resetting baseline that if you move from you know, you were working in tier 1 or tier 2, and after a 5-year period you have enough data and enough high quality data to start using tier 3, that you could potentially make a case to the voluntary registry that you want to upgrade from tier 2 to tier 3 in the last 2 phases of the program. My guess is that that would be welcomed, because it's generally a higher accuracy and more trusted process if you have very well calibrated and validated models, or if you have some other form of validation like satellite data or water level sensors, those kinds of things.
Good. Dr. Frisco wants to, comment or ask a question. Dr. Frisco.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Nelson. Yeah, this is actually a comment, regarding this carbon credits issue in the Philippines. The alternate wetting and drying technology in irrigation. This was introduced long time ago in the Philippines when I was still with PhilRice. And of course, in collaboration with the International Rice Research Institute and the National Irrigation Administration. But recent meetings I attended, I questioned NIA, the National Irrigation Administration, regarding this AWD, because for so many years, I have not seen large areas where farmers adopted this technology. So it is very difficult to convince the farmers as far as AWD is concerned. And regarding you mentioned some points in your presentation using the early maturing varieties and reduction of nitrogen fertilizer. This will impact on the national program as far as the Masagana Rice Industry Development Program in the Philippines, wherein we have a target yield by 2028, and we are highlighting the irrigated areas using the National Irrigation System of NIA, the communal irrigation systems, and using hybrid rice. And actually, one of the problems why we cannot attain the higher yield is because there is a lack of fertilizer application on the part of the farmer. So it's more on convincing the farmers to increase, particularly the nitrogen fertilizer, to increase the yield, and of course, hopefully will increase their yield at the end of the day. So I don't know if you have some practical suggestions as to what can be done or can be applied in the Philippines for us to really, convince the farmers adopt these recommendations as far as the carbon credits. And lastly, farmers are always asking us when we attended this AWD, what are their benefits, how they can avail of these carbon credits that you are mentioning. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Dr. Nelson.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Frisco. And yes, I think all the points you raised are very, very much relevant. In the Philippines, particularly, the fact that we don't have lots of evidence that people are continuing to practice alternate wetting and drying actually sets the Philippines up very well to participate in carbon markets, because it means you can be relatively sure that they're not currently doing alternate wetting and drying. So it makes it a very interesting place potentially for carbon credit projects. However, when you mention that there might be reluctance on part of the farmer, other kind of challenges or barriers that are preventing them from doing it because it was introduced many years ago, and yet we're not seeing, people uptaking that on their own. This is exactly the purpose of carbon markets. So it's to create a new asset that did not exist and value for that asset. So the asset itself is something that doesn't exist. It's something that did not happen, which is very strange for a market. So the product doesn't exist because the action actually reduced something or got rid of something. So we're incentivizing them for not creating something. So the product is absent, and this is what makes it quite difficult in the concept of a market. But if the incentives, the idea, I think, from a lot of private sector companies is that you could have a carbon credit project that could generate enough from the credits to pay back the project and pay farmers and also pay like a return on the investment to the company. That, I think, is unrealistic. I'm going to say this, it's my own opinion. It's not the opinion necessarily of my institute or IRRI. But these kinds of projects are complex and the costs are very high because you have to reach many, many, many fragmented smallholder farmers. And the costs of that just inevitably are high. So just recovering the cost of actually doing the project is ambitious, much less being able to have leftover to actually hand on to farmers. So if it is really an incentive, an economic incentive, that is the only thing that's going to get the farmer to do this, then it's very likely it's going to need to be supported through public funding or previously sustainability was funded as a philanthropic effort. And so the ability to introduce a market should actually catalyze that to expand, because now you can offset some of those philanthropic expenses and then, theoretically expand the area under sustainable practices. However, what we're really seeing is an opposite function, is that people are seeing this, there's too much speculation around the asset itself, that now you have a lot of companies coming in that just want the carbon project so that they can earn money on it. And that's not really the way to look at it. So we're very likely going to need investments from public sector and grants from philanthropic organizations and companies to continue to really see money flow into the hands of farmers. On the side of the fertilizer, I completely agreed when I mentioned that in my slides. That was when I talk about reducing fertilizer, it should not affect yield. So that's in areas where farmers over apply fertilizer, which is the case in Vietnam, where I primarily have worked. So that's why I put it into that low emission package. But in the case of the Philippines, if they're not using enough fertilizer and you're trying to boost yields, then absolutely you would want to encourage increase in the use of fertilizer, but that would also offset your mitigation potential, because when you increase nitrogen fertilizer, you increase nitrous oxide. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that there would need to be some balancing and trade-offs to consider in cases where you're trying to increase yields and fertilizer use.
One thing,
Dr. Basangkatawa, one thing that I also noticed in your presentation, I think it's on the positive side, is the premium price for the low gas emission rice, because currently that's a major problem now in the Philippines, wherein we have a very low price of paddy, and the farmers have no incentive at all. I mean, they are very disappointed with this current trend, and the more if we introduce this project, I don't know how they will accept it. So, but introducing the concept of premium price for the low carbon emission rice, I think this is one thing that we can look into in the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we are also working with private sector to set those purchase agreements and prices that can be higher for emission or for low emission rice products. So yeah, thanks.
So there are two more questions because for the paucity of time, but quickly let me add my perspective. I think the DSR and the herbicide tolerant technologies in direct seeded rice will also be one area which I think the farmers can look at it. I fully agree. I think this is a process. Back in India with 44 million hectares of rice, this whole thing is being discovered, but I see a huge potential in DSR. Yes, cultural practice of the farmers, kind of doing that fine balance between what the farmer wants and how do we actually change his cultural practices is a challenge. But I think if the rice has to be grown, which is largely an Asian phenomena, I think we'll have to find better ways to grow this rice, because otherwise the current practices are very unsustainable, so to say. But in India, we see this market evolving. But yes, I think it is a huge work in process. There are two questions, the last questions which I would take. I think this is a very interesting question about who owns the carbon credit, the landowner or a project developer or a shared agreement basis. If so, what is the typical ratio? I think I would leave you, Katherine, to answer it, because I am participating in these projects from my company. So we know the ratios, but I think you would be the best. And the other question is it possible to participate for a private company from Bangladesh, and how? These are the two questions. And after that, I think we will close this session. Please, all yours.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And I would also encourage you to give your perspective from your experience within your company. The ownership of the credits is a very important part of being able to participate in the project. And so this is also where it gets a little complicated in places where the people who farm the land might not own the land. But basically what you need to establish is that they have the rights to the land where the credits are generated, and therefore that also means they have the rights to sell the credits, to own the credits and to sell the credits. But generally speaking, when they're registered for the project itself, what the agreement is that they're giving up those rights for participation in the project for an agreed upon, benefit, like incentive. So it's essentially saying, whatever credits I generate will be purchased by this company at this agreed upon price. So that it then for them becomes their product that they're selling. it can be very different depending on the context. So like here in Vietnam, there's not really a lot like direct land ownership. There's tenure and people have rights to the land, but it's really ultimately government land. And so that's where it gets a little bit tricky, and it might in other countries as well. In terms of participating from Bangladesh, sure, absolutely, 100%. What I presented was not a carbon credit project that exists. It's the process of how you set one up. There's a lot of interest right now in Bangladesh, and World Bank, I know, is also really focusing strongly on some low emission investments in rice and livestock. So I would encourage you, if you would like to do this in Bangladesh, to reach out to the appropriate government partners. We have an office in Bangladesh, can support connecting and helping support that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Katherine. Yeah, my perspective, because we are, there are 3 or 4 companies in India with whom we are working. So we facilitate and enable them the farmer access. In India, the only difference is everybody owns their land. The government does not own any land. The farmers own their land and they have full right of it. So to that extent, the farmer is free to make a decision. So I think it is between the farmer, the input company, here in this case, the seed company, and the person who is actually, providing this carbon credits or trying to validate. And also there is a percentage share. It is a process of negotiations between 3 of them. And, there are 4 or 5 companies with whom, negotiations are going on, and with 1 or 2 companies we have signed it. So that is how it will keep evolving, as long as the ownership of the land is there with the farmers. But I can tell you that you will not discover this pot of gold so quickly. It is a process. It could take a couple of years, maybe more than a decade, because the baseline needs to be established. The differences needs to be done. So it's a process, but I think all of us, we should, go through this process for making the rice farming very sustainable. And, thank you so much, Dr. Katherine, for your insights. And it was an absolute pleasure to have you on this webinar to share your thoughts. And I think hopefully this has been very helpful to all the participants too. And with this, I would like to thank you again and close this webinar, this part of it. Thank you so much. Kuna, can we move to the next webinar? Are we okay on time? I think
yes, we can move to the next presentation topic, sir.
Yeah, okay. So the next presentation topic is carbon credit management for field crops. The speakers are Dr. Kanyanat Sirithunya, Pattama, Director Research and Development Institute, Rajamangala University of Technology, Lanna, Chiang, Thailand, and Dr. Suraphon Chaiwongsar, Faculty of Science and Agriculture Technology, Rajamangala University of Technology, Lanna, Lampang, Thailand. So a brief introduction about Dr. Kanyanat Pattama. Dr. Kanyanat Pattama Sirithunya is Director of Research and Development Institute at RMUTL, Chiang, Thailand. With over 40 years in crop improvement and a PhD in molecular plant breeding, she is a leader in developing climate-resilient rice and cereal varieties. Her work supports carbon credit strategies through high-efficiency, low-emission crops tailored to Thailand's diverse agroecological zones. Dr. Suraphon Chaiwongsar from, again, RMUTL, Lampang, Thailand, is an expert in sustainable agriculture and bioenergy, holding a PhD in cellular and molecular biology. His research spans carbon-efficient crop systems, circular economy models, and community innovations. His award-winning inventions reflect a strong commitment to eco-friendly agriculture technologies and carbon reduction. Thank you so much, Dr. Kanyanat and Dr. Suraphon, for taking your time and educating us on the carbon credit management for field crops. It's an absolute pleasure to have both of you. The floor is open to you. Please go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a great introduction. So,
okay, good afternoon, everybody, and I am very thankful for the APSA to invite us to have to join this webinar.
okay, so now I would like to present the carbon credit management for field crop, which might quite different from Katherine talks, but is still focused on. So today we will divide into 2 parts. Dr. Kanyanat will talk about the field management for carbon credit, And for myself, I will tell you briefly about steps to get carbon credits from the field crops. So first, I would like to clarify a little bit because some of you may not familiar with the carbon credits. So in terms of the carbon that we're talking about here, the carbon is referred to as a greenhouse gas and also referred to a carbon sequestration. For we already know that the farm activities emit a lot of greenhouse gases. So those greenhouse gas has different global warming potential. So those greenhouse gases is calculated and do normalize into carbon dioxide equivalents. And those carbon dioxide equivalents sometimes we refer to as a carbon. So this carbon as a greenhouse gas. And another carbon is a carbon that we capture from the atmosphere and we store it into a long-term storage. For example, put into the soil as a soil organic carbon. So these are another carbon. So for when we talk about the carbon credits, we talk that the first is we reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And also we increase the carbon storage for a long-term storage we call carbon sequestration. So normally the carbon credits mean for one carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalents. And from now on, I will let Dr. Kanyanat explain how we're gonna get the carbon credits.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Suraphon. And how to get the carbon credit? We have the two types. The one type of a mandatory market and voluntary market. And yes, and now we can manage our farm to earn the carbon credit. The carbon credit is that you know for the greenhouse gas, and mean greenhouse gas very emission of bad, and we will reduce the greenhouse gas. And for the carbon sequestration, now we keep in the soil, we keep in the sequestration is very little, and now we need to increase the carbon sequestration. That means we call the carbon credit. We need to do that. Yes. Okay, I would like to show you about the maize cultivation for the carbon footprint. If you look like this, the carbon footprint we can see about the fertilizer. Fertilizer is the emission to is the number one for the 40.5%. And the fuel and farm machinery, when we produce the cultivation of the maize, about the 23.1%. And when you use the nitrogen or use the fertilizer, nitrogen oxide emission from your farmland about the 34%. For the seed production, that means the seed for the that you can use only a little. But most of this we need to reduce all of that. When we calculate this about the 60.2 kilogram carbon per hectare, that's why we need to reduce the emission for the maize cultivation. Okay, we come to the soybean. Soybean, this for the soybean produced in the USA, that we have the data. Sorry. We have the data that the most of this when we produce the one of thing that diesel and gasoline, this is very high the image, high the produce the gas emission. And the second is the residue of the nitrogen that you can see. The residue of the nitrogen, that means you can use the nitrogen or use the fertilizer is will be released of the, we call the plant can use. And a little for other and a little bit alarm. Alarm will be can to help of the soil. Is a healthy soil, something like this. That's why we can think about how we can reduce to our farm management or our farm production. The reduce of the one number one. This is easy for you can do that. You can reduce by your tillage. If you reduce tillage, you can use the gasoline, reduce your petroleum. If you use the pump, you can use the solar cell. If you use the machine, you can use the EV machine. This is easy to reduce the fuel and use and create energy. This is the one of emission can reduce. Okay, for the nitrogen, that you can see the nitrogen is have the, if you need to have a good product, the good product for the farm, that means you will be use the nitrogen, you will be use the nutrient, but the best is that the nutrient use efficiency, that means 4R, the light source. The light source is that you can know about your soil when you produce that the crop need. The light rate. The light rate, that means for the fertilizer to the crop need. This is very important. The important about that, if you put the nutrient fertilizer need the time, light time. Light time, that means the plant will be need, the crop will be need on that time. All of that means the right pace that keep nutrient on the crop can be used. This is easy to do, but normally our farmer or every farmer don't do right the 4R principle. The first time when we will to how to get to know nitrogen management, that means you will know about the how to your soil. We have the how many nutrients and you can keep the soil and analysis. Because if you know the soil, the plant will be, you know how much you can use the nitrogen or nutrient management. This is the one important and easy to do, but normally our farmer just leave that. Okay. Okay. Another one for the nitrification inhibitor. This is the one of the now the technology we have the enzyme. We can the nitrification inhibitor enzyme DMP. This enzyme for the to protect is not to produce the nitrogen nitrous oxide emission and keep in the soil. This is the one of the technology, but we can use that and we can pay for the soil and can keep the carbon in the soil. Okay. Okay, now we can know how the carbon credit. Carbon credit, you know about the carbon emission. Carbon emission you will reduce, but the carbon sequestration you will keep it in the soil. When you pull the carbon dioxide out to the air and we will pull up, store in the ground. And we will keep the fire extreme for the weather. That means you will do the carbon farm management to get the carbon credit. This is the practice all our farmer will do. The one of no-till or reduce the till rate. Reduce the till rate, you can reduce the emission, right? You can use the cover residue, can use the cover crop or crop rotation. All of this, that means you put the organic matter and keep in the soil. For the butter strip, that means you have a sum of the variety of the species to the strip when you planting, like the plant maize, and you have some the we call the leguminous crop, something like this, to keep the nitrogen in the soil also. Fertilizing pasture and pasture grazing, some area only the one crop per year. We can use like this. And some the manual application. You look, the nitrogen management, I think this is very important for the field crop and to reduce the emission and how can keep the soil, keep the carbon in the soil also. This is a farm management to get the carbon credit. Yes. Okay, no burn. The impact of the pool. If burn, we can a lot of the emission, right? For the 2 kilo of the burning, right? We can produce emission a lot of. And okay. mostly our farmer will be easy to do like that, to burning the store, to burning of the waste. And one is the loss of nutrient from the soil and low organic matter, and the soil organic matter is very low. And if you keep no burn, you keep low, normally we can for the minimal tillage, you can keep the soil organic matter and high organic matter in the soil. Yes. Minimal tillage like this. We can do many style, no till and have some cover, steep up tillage, the leads up tillage, or all tillage or shallow tillage. Depend on your produce, your farm, and mostly we will thinking about the gasoline that you use, something like that. And minimal tillage. If you minimal tillage, you look these two picture. The minimal tillage will be keep the carbon dioxide, we keep the using the water is reduced using the water. But if you tillage like this, it's good production, but you will emission the carbon dioxide and water evaporation too much. That's why minimal tillage is the one of the, we call that one of the protocol that we told about our farmers who, okay, minimal tillage or no till, but they will practice first. Steep tillage is also the same, because some steep and not tillage all, but we keep some. If we can use, have some store, we will keep the carbon in the soil also. Yes. Okay. The loss, when you like you do, if we tillage all, we will lose 2 tons of carbon per hectare. But if you give all the steep tillage, you can have the 0.5 ton in the new carbon in the soil per hectare. This is how to do that. Yes, for the farmer. Cover crop, you look like the cover crop. If on the left side, you look, the carbon will be lost to the carbon dioxide onto the air. But if you have we call the cover crop, that we will use the carbon dioxide in the air and to produce for them and keep carbon in the soil also. Reduce the soil erosion, suppress and extensive root system and water filtration. I think this is the one of the protocol to working about the soil and product of our farm. Yes. Conservation tillage. Mostly one time they use the conservation tillage for reducing the tillage limited loss of the carbon and through oxidation, decomposition, and erosion. But if you cover the cropping, the plant will be absorb carbon dioxide that I told you, and from the atmosphere and the soil through the decomposition and the metal root exudate. This is very good, but we can have some for additional source of the carbon, increase stock of the organic, like the biochar, and we can keep it that. This is two pictures to compare that without the soil amendment and with the soil amendment, we can do, if without the soil carbon storage is very, not too low, but very low. But when you have the compost biochar amendment or rock amendment, we will have the enhancing of the carbon storage. This is the one of protocol that if we would like to the farm management of the carbon credit in the farm, what we are do like this. The carbon dioxide sequestration, this is the plan that the model. I will have we plant the one crop like the example maize. And we have to the line of we call the intercrop and to cover the soil. Microorganism we can do it and have the soil organic carbon in this. And we have to increasing soil productivity and growth to boost of our plant have the product, have the yield. And if you put the amendment, the biochar and basal, we have a good more the mineral nutrient. This is the one of the model that all of us we will tow off our farmer to the farm management to reduce the emission and to carbon sequestration. Yes. Okay, I will go back and keep to the Dr. Suraphon to talk about we manage our farm to earn the carbon credit. How to do that? Okay. Okay, Dr. Suraphon.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kanyanat. So from part, we will talk, Dr. Kanyanat just explain the practice that can earn you a carbon credits. But so how we really get the carbon credits? First, I would like to elaborate more that we have to have the baseline or the business as usual. And we have to create an activities that we call the projects activities that gonna improve the carbon emission and our carbon storage, and we call the projects activity. So the difference between baseline and the project will create you a carbon credit. For example, if you have the conventional farming that that release a lot of greenhouse gas and nitrous oxide, and then you shift your practice into conservation practice to reduce the nitrous oxide and to keep the carbon into the soil. This difference could create the carbon credits, and these carbon credits I will skip this one. And so once you already decide that you want to try the carbon credits, so these are the steps that I put together from our experience between I and Dr. Kanyanat, that we work with the private company to create the carbon program. So the protocol, the step is, number one, you have to pick an eligible crediting program and methodology. Because right now there are a lot of carbon credit program, and what I talk about mostly will be the voluntary program, and the most popular two are the VERA, Verified Carbon Standard, and the second one is the Gold Standard. And from the Dr. Kanyanat talk is mostly for the field crop, except rice, because Katherine already talked about rice already. So we will talk mostly about the field crop, like maize or soybean, that you can put this practice into real farming. Once you get the program that you want, you have the methodology that you have. For example, for VERA, you have the good methodology. We call it ALM, Agricultural Land Management, which cover any practice that improve the land, and you can use that methodology. Once you have that methodology, then you have to choose the practice that you think can generate credits easily. I mean easily, because some practice maybe not accept for the farmer, or it's very too difficult for the farmer. So you have to think the practice that the farmer can accept easily and can have the co-benefit for them. So as I told you, there's not much choice in agricultural that much. Mostly is about the soil sequestration and the reduce of agricultural inputs. This highlight here for the agricultural sector. And I think this point is very important to do the feasibility assessment, because when we're talking about the carbon credit program, most people will think about the price of the carbon credit, how much money I will get, but they forgot how to do the feasibility assessment first. So what I think that is very important when you think about the cost, of course, the carbon cost is the fixed cost that you have to pay to verify your carbon credits, but you have to think about the investment cost and also the project cost. And as you have to you have to think that the project is not a 1 or 2 year projects, it's around 10 years projects. Then you have to set up the budget to cover all the activities within 10 years. So in order to make sure that your project will run smoothly. And another thing is the time, because to get the carbon credit certified, sometimes it's used more than 2 years. Then if time is the issue for you, you should not choose the carbon credit program, you choose something else, because this certified process needs sometimes, and also the carbon price. As you know that the carbon price is a subject of the supply and demands, and sometimes the price, we are not sure that in the future what price will be. For example, here you can see the carbon credits for the gold standard platform. The from clean energy is cost about $12 per credit. But when you work with the farmers or the minorities or with the agricultural sector or the forestry, you get a lot more. But we're not sure about the future. So these are the factors that you have to think when you do the feasibility study. If you think that your calculation is good, you're going to get the profit and you decide to move on, then you need to form a team. I think team formation is very important. The first one here is that you need is that you need the project, you need the project developer. First you need the project developers who gonna write the project for you. If you are not expert in that area, maybe you need to get the project consultants to help you. And of course, you need to an investor. It's either gonna be the private sector or any public sector if you want. And of course, once you submit the project, I think the thing is very important is the monitoring team or the team that's gonna run the project. You have to imagine if you work with a 200,000 hectare, how you can get all the information, how you can check that every farmers do the practice that you claim, and how you do the measurement and monitoring them. I think this part gonna need a lot of manpower and also a lot of funding or a lot of money to do that. But I think the digital tools maybe help, and now there's a lot of tools that going to be available very soon to help you on that. And of course, working with the farmer is very important. And can you imagine if you work with like 10,000 farmers, how going to be busy and crazy? And of course, I think another team is really important is the market team. The market team will help you to increase the value of your carbon credits, because you have to claim you have to show that your carbon credits is have higher quality, have higher value. For example, it's come from very reliable issuers, and it also create a co-benefit. For example, your project make the farmer's life more happier, get more money, or have the more quality social or something like that, then your credits will be look a lot nicer compared to the other. Once you get the team already, then you need to do the stakeholder consultation and SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals Assessment. This is a requirement for gold standard program. And for the stakeholder, it means that you need to talk with the people that related to your projects, farmers, people in the area, the leader in the area, and also the government that relate in that area. And if you make sure that everyone understand your project, everyone don't have problem with your project, or you fix your project according to that recommendation, then you are good to go. And then you need to do the alignment that your project activity matching to which goals of SDG, and then you write it down and you how you're going to monitor them. Once you get this already, then you have to do the baseline development. I'm not going for the deep detail because there's a lot of details for this one, but normally you have to pick the area that you want to work with, and then you collect the data, the practice, and you need to do the stratification to identify how many zones or areas that you have to work with, and then you collect all the activities in the past for at least 3 years and make up as a baseline. Once you have everything ready, then you can create the project design document. In the project design document, you should have the project description, the area that you want to work, the baseline methodology that you use, the additionality assessment, and the calculation for the carbon credits. Also, you have to show them that you have the monitoring plan, and you already have the stakeholder consultation, and also the sustainable development benefits. And once you have the PDD already, you submit them to the program that you wish, and then you have the external auditor to validate your project. We call the project validation, or we call by the VVB, is called validation verification body. Will do validate your project. Once your project is validated, it means that you're good. Then you can you can start, or you already start the project employment, because sometimes the validation needs some time, so you can start project before the validation approved, but you have to make sure that you have gathering all the data. Once you start the project, the most difficult part, I think, is measurement, reporting, and verification, or MRV, because it needs a lot of manpower, as I said, and you have to be very carefully how to collect the data, how to show the data, and working with the farmers is not easy. So one thing that I want to recommend you is that you have to think that you have the manpower enough to do this job in order to do a lot of area. Once you get all the activities, and then you do the report, and this report, and then you will be get verified by another external auditors, and they will see that you do what you plan or what you write in your project, and then they will certify your project, and your project will create carbon credits that you can do the marketing for your carbon credits. So that's all the steps that I think may get you idea how to do the carbon credit. I think that will be all, and we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for Dr. Suraphon for your presentation. There are 4 questions here, and I will take one by one. What are the challenges to educate farmers in Thailand for the carbon credit projects? That is the first question.
For the first question, most challenge is the technology transfer. Because from our experience, it's very difficult to get the farmer to accept the technology that we want them to practice. For example, low tillage or minimum tillage. What they really care is that the profit. So we have to make sure that any technology or any practice that we want the farmer to do, we have to prove already that they create more money or more productivities. I think that's the most challenging thing. Dr. Kanyanat, you have anything else?
Okay. I will adding one. From the farm in Thailand, the most challenge is no burn. That's why we need about how to the farmer or the field crop no burn, all that. This is the one of our government will be pay allow like this. I think this is how to our farmer will be adoption like in how to no burn. Yes, but now we can transfer the technology to our farmer also. Yes.
Yeah, I think stubble burning is a big issue. I fully appreciate what we also struggle back in India about stubble burning and the consequent these things. But yes, I also agree with, there has to be an incentive for the farmers to, practice. And then, both the farmers as well as all of us in the civil society and the policymakers have to be patient, because that is a transition. I fully agree. So the second question is, how effective DMP using as a nitrification inhibitor? How long DMP is still effective in soil after the application? Is there any side effect or a negative effect after using DMP?
For this question, I think it's hard to answer, because it depends on the condition of your soil and weather in order the DMP to be active. But in many papers, they already shows that the DMP is very effective for reduce the nitrous oxide and also reduce the population of the microorganisms that do the nitrification. So in that one, I think it depends on the area and the soil types. So you can look it more for the papers.
Again, one more question. They are thanking both of you, Dr. Kanyanat and Dr. Suraphon. And the same question actually came earlier too. What are the main challenges in implementing the carbon credit schemes for both the large scale, both the small scale farmers and the large scale production?
For this one here, for our experience, we feel very happy when we work with the seed company because they already have the contract with the farmers. So they can deal with the farmer very easily. And they can also control the inputs like fertilizers or the chemicals. And they also have the logbooks, the farmer write everything. So it's much more easier for working with the large company for that involved with the seed company that already have the contract farmers. But working with the small group of farmers, the most challenging part is that when we do the feasibility study, we found out that in order to get ROI in that is good return on investment that is good for us, it has to be at least like let's say I'm not sure for 40,000 acre in order to get the benefits.
Yep, I agree. See, in fact, I think this whole carbon credit scheme, there have to be aggregators in between who will work with the companies who are providing the carbon credits and who can facilitate and enable, especially for small farmers. My take here is large commodity companies who are actually, engaging farmers to get products which they want to export, it's a little easier for them. But for most of the seed companies who work with a lot of farmers on a commercial one where they sell the seed, we will have to figure out mechanisms where there is an enough incentive for both the seed company as well as companies like yours or and then the farmers. As I told earlier too, it is a process and it would take some time for each of the player in the value chain to realize what it is. Yeah. And the last question here in this sequence is, how long does it take for the project to be certified to do marketing?
At least 2 years. At least 2
Patience is
years.
the key. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So I think these are the questions which have come, from this Q&A side. I will just wait for a few more minutes if there are any more questions which are popping up. Otherwise, a great presentation, very good lessons learned from your Thai experience to both of you. And I think yes, I would be very optimistic on this initiatives by different countries, by different governments. I would say that everyone needs to be patient in the process, but eventually I think it would be a win-win for everyone. It will keep evolving. So thank you, Dr. Kanyat and Dr. Suraphon for a very interesting and an evolving scenario which we are seeing in agriculture for highlighting what you have done and how this can be done in the other places. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for APSA also to invite us.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Kuna, I think we are done with this webinar formally.
Yes.
So any closing comments from you before we sign off?
Right. So on behalf of APSA and the APSA Special Interest Group for Field Crops, I also would like to thank the three speakers actually, Dr. Katherine and Dr. Kanyanat, Dr. Suraphon, for the great presentations. And also today we have learned a lot on the practical steps on how to start the carbon credit management. And also we learned about the challenges. And we can notice that it takes time to conduct this project as well, including the challenges, the technology transfer. So I hope this will benefit to our members to learn and to start this project. So with that, thank you very much. I will just quickly share the survey form to everyone so that you can complete this form and then you will get the certificate of attendance of this webinar. All right, so let me quickly share the screen.
Share the presentations too, Kuna. with all the participants, or will you keep it in
Yes,
the
so
site? Okay.
after this, after we finish the webinar, we'll share the presentations and also recordings on APSA website, which everyone who register for this webinar, you'll get the details via email, including the QR code to scan for the post-webinar survey. It's really short. And once you finish the 3 minutes post-webinar survey, you will get the e-certificate of attendance. So with that, I would like to close this webinar and stay tuned for more sessions for the Field Crops webinar series next year. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
good care.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dr.
Bye.
Venkatram.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.